Good morning. This is Eric Brotman, the CEO of BFG Financial Advisors in suburban Maryland. And I am here with Shari Fleming from the Law Office of Shari Fleming. And this is Charitable Giving, Estate Planning, Community Impact, and Building Lasting Legacies. By way of introduction, I will share a little bit about myself. Shari will then do the same, and we'll go through not only our why, but our how on charitable giving strategies. Before I do, though, Hannah Dennis is in the background today. There's a chat box on the bottom right. If you have questions for us, you can type them into that chat box at any time. She might interrupt us during a slide, or we might hold them to the end, depending on the content of the questions. But please don't be bashful. We'd love to have this be interactive. So, a little bit about me for those of you who don't know me. Started BFG Financial Advisors 23 years ago. I've been in practice since 1994. And I'm now running a firm that has clients in 37 states. We manage almost $1 billion for families, literally coast to coast. And one of my big passions is charitable giving. It's doing well by doing good and helping families make those kinds of decisions and have those kinds of discussions, and to build a legacy for generations to come that's about more than money. So we're going to talk about a bunch of that today. I also host the podcast, Don't Retire, Graduate. You can see that in the background. And my third book is by that same name. So if you're interested in learning more, you can do so. Shari, how about an introduction?
Hi, everyone. My name is Shari Fleming, and I am a Maryland licensed attorney. I am also a charitable advisor. My law practice is primarily in estates and trusts. I do both planning as well as probate and trust administration. And quite simply, I love to help people pass and preserve wealth while also supporting the causes they love. And so another hat that I wear is that of plant giving officer or really a charitable advisor for Bowie State University here in the great state of Maryland. And I just love doing this work.
Well, and actually, Shari and I met doing a program on philanthropy and estate planning at a local university, and so that's how we realized that we had some of the same passions, and we're going to dive right in. And I think anytime you start talking about charitable giving, there's a tendency to get into strategy, and I don't want to go there first. I think we need to go into why. Why does this matter? And I'll give you first stab. We'll sort of alternate a little bit this morning, but what is your why when it comes to charitable giving?
Well, from a fundamental place, I would not be the professional that you see today if it were not for someone's charity. I am a first generation college graduate. I am a first generation law school graduate. I could not afford to do so. Very bright, very smart guy, get grades, but could not afford to do so. My family just couldn't make it work in a way that I wanted. I wanted to go away to school. And so, because of someone else's philanthropy at a fundamental level, I am who you see. I receive scholarships. I receive a lot of assistance. I'm not just from an institution, but from my community. I had a community of people who rallied around me to make me the person that I am today. So when I'm talking about philanthropy, I'm not just talking about the institutional philanthropy that we see and giving to charities. I'm also talking about the giving that we give one to another, just in the little things that we do. And so charitable giving matters, just because we want to support our communities, whatever your community is. And this is what I share with Bowie alum quite often. Who else is supposed to do it? Who
Yeah.
else is supposed to support this institute
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
for the individuals who receive the benefit from it? And so I feel that way about most charities, whether it be a faith-based charity, a collegiate charity, a mission-based charity. The question is, who else is supposed to do it? So from a fundamental level, too much is given, much is required. To whom much is given, much is required. And if you found yourself being the benefit of some service, something, some institution, then you should pay it back. And if
Mm,
you did not receive service from an institution, everyone received help in some way, somehow. We're no man is an island. We all are helped in some way. But if you
mm,
find yourself to be a little bit more fortunate, then it's helpful to pay it forward, to create opportunity for others. So, charitable giving is important to me. It means a lot to me from a very personal level, and so it ends up being very a phenomenal experience to be able to use not only my time, my talent, and my learned skill to be able to help people accomplish their goals in charity.
I can echo everything you just said, and without repeating it, I think we're in total harmony in terms of the why and the finding causes that are material to us and that are meaningful to us. I'm going to take two different approaches on the why though, and add to that so that we're not repeating one another because we sure could today. One is I think one of the whys is that it creates discussion and training and learning for family members. And so if you're in a position to donate time, talent, and treasury, and they're all valuable in different ways. Some of us have more of one than the other two, and that can change over time. I mean, as a young professional, a lot of times we have plenty of time and no treasury. Sometimes as we get older, we have less time and more treasury. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. But I think teaching our children and the next generation, the value of this is super important. I don't think they're getting this in school any more than they get financial literacy training or basic budgeting or any of those kinds of things. But I think teaching kids the value of money is more than just understanding what it is to earn a paycheck. I think it's
Absolutely.
really about the ways in which our own blessings, our own abundance, our own abilities can really transform and change somebody else's life. And teaching our kids that at an early enough age that it sticks, and not so early that they don't follow, but once your children are old enough to think about causes that mean something to them, whether it's about other children's charities or hospitals, whether it's about something to do with animals or seniors or things that are age appropriate that they can really wrap their hands around, and helping them figure out how to have a life of service. I know in some cultures tithing is a thing, and some religious institutions practice that. Whether you're doing that or not, I think there's a learning element and a training and teaching element for the next generation. So I think that's one of the whys. The other why is a little bit more. I'm going to say a little more standoffish, a little less warm and fuzzy, and that's that there's so much need, and so many people need help. And if charities and nonprofits don't provide it, then it has to come from somewhere else. And that usually is government or some kind of other tax-based solution. So I would much rather see all of us be in a position to give to those organizations in need and to those people in need in a way that we choose rather than have that done by some large entity on a grand scale. I just don't think it's efficient. I don't think it's effective. And frankly, even if our tax dollars are used for good, it doesn't feel good to pay taxes. It feels great to make a gift. So I think I think it ultimately, even if it accomplishes the same thing, the psychology of feeling good about making a difference, I think is really important in the why. So let's start talking about some strategies, and I'll take the first one, and I'll give you the second one, and we'll just alternate. The first one is the donor advised fund. Donor advised funds are the proliferating. These are funds that weren't super popular and now have become, I think, very, very popular. And the reason for that is that when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act went into place and the standard deviation, see, I'm in the investment business. When the standard deduction went up, wow. When the standard deduction went up so much that most American taxpayers stopped itemizing, as a result, most American taxpayers who don't itemize, in fact, don't benefit a lot from a tax perspective from their philanthropy. They don't get a write-off essentially if they're not itemizing on their taxes. And I know there's a new credit that's relatively small, but in general, that's true. And that's close to 90%. What a donor advised fund allows people to do is it allows you to make a gift to a fund that is a one-way street for philanthropy. It can only be used for giving. It allows you to take a tax deduction in the year that you make the gift to the fund, but you can donate money from the fund to any public or private charity, 501(c)(3)s, any charity that will accept that gift. You can do that anytime. It doesn't have to be the same year. so that instead of making, if you're making a 5 year commitment to your favorite university, whatever it is, instead of writing a check every year and not deducting that and not itemizing, you can instead take a large amount of money or larger amount of money, 5 years worth or more, put it in a donor advised fund, take that write off in the year in which you make that gift, and still use that to donate over the 5 years to that university or anybody else you'd like. You can't tie a DAF pledge directly to a charitable pledge. It's really important that they not happen simultaneously. There's lots of legal reasons for that, which Shari can probably explain better than I can. But at the end of the day, it's a really easy tax planning tool. It's also great for family discussions. And there are donor advised funds that your financial advisor can set up. There's DIY donor advised funds. There's app based donor advised funds. And most of them are very inexpensive, and they're designed to allow you to time your giving and do your tax planning when they're not the same time frames. So, Sherry, what did I miss? Hold me. Other than standard deviation is not a standard deduction. Other than that,
I don't think you missed anything. If I can add and kinda
yeah,
connect to the why that we just discussed, one of the things that you mentioned was, doing some kind of family planning and giving and getting children, getting younger
yes,
people into the mindset of being philanthropic, and
mhm,
I have 2 teenagers and an 8-year-old, 17 getting ready to go to college, 15 and an 8-year-old in 3rd grade. And financial literacy is a regular practice in this home, as well as philanthropy. And so I find that a donor advised fund is a very good tool as you're teaching your kid or your children financial literacy to also teach them about responsibility in community and allow them to select charities, do research, identify charities. My children hate the fact that every aspect of life is an educational lesson. They hate it. But that's my job, right?
well,
To
they
make
hate it
sure that
now,
they're
but
equipped.
they will look back on that and thank you later. But right now, it's annoying.
Yeah, and so
Yeah,
it ends up being the fun part for those
yeah,
families who are philanthropically inclined. It is the fun
yeah.
part if you are having conversations about estate planning, financial planning, donor advised funds become weaving it in is the tool that you use to be able to cultivate just the mindset of giving. And so I think it should not be understated or underestimated that this is a tool that kind of really democratizes philanthropy in a lot of ways, because
Big time.
if you are someone who has multiple charities to give to, like my husband and I, we have our colleges, our sororities, our fraternities, our faith-based institutions. We are not strapped, but there are a lot of places that require our assistance, and we're willing to assist. A donor advised fund is a really good way to streamline that, as well as get the children involved as to what we find important and have them identify the things that are important to them as well.
Democratize is a great word for this because this used to be a playground for the ultra wealthy. What very wealthy families would do is set up a private foundation, which some still do, and it's a wonderful thing. You set up a private foundation, you have a board of directors, and your kids potentially serve on that board, and they're involved in grants and they're involved in scholarships and all the things that are important, but it requires an enormous amount of money to do that. And it used to be, I think a rule of thumb was unless you were donating $1 million, don't bother with a foundation. Now I think it's more like 5 million because DAFs have democratized and made it possible for folks who are making gifts that by all means are generous, but are also more modest compared to the ones with two commas in them.
Yeah.
And it allows families to have those discussions on a scale that is appropriate for them. And so, a great point, Shari. I think that's really important that this is now accessible to almost any family who wants to be inclined to do this. So, I love that.
Awesome.
Let's go to the next topic, and you get first stab at this one because you're the lawyer in the room. I'm letting you handle the trusts.
Okay, so there are when we talk first, let me take a step back because I don't know who our listener is. So first let me explain what a trust is. A trust is a vehicle. I like to use the analogy of a purse or a bucket or a container. It is a container for assets that are being held for the benefit of someone else. So the grantor or settler, which is the person putting an asset or cash into the vehicle of a trust, is doing so leaving someone else in charge. That person is called a trustee. The trustee is in charge of what is in the container, the asset or the cash, for the benefit of a beneficiary. So when you're setting up a trust, there are always three parties to consider, or let me not say three parties, three titles or three seats, because you could have one person wearing two hats here, but you always have the grantor or the settler. Those terms are used interchangeably for the person who creates the trust. The trustee, that is the person who is responsible for providing or following the rules and the terms and condition of the written trust agreement. And then the beneficiary, that is the party who benefits from the items that are placed in the trust vehicle or container and then invested. So those are the three um, prongs, are the three key players to make a trust function. When someone creates a trust, as I said, they can put cash or an asset into a vehicle, into the trust vehicle. You can use a house, real estate. There are a number of things. Some people would say IRA. I wouldn't say don't do that. By the way, this is a perfect segue for my disclaimer. I am not providing legal advice
That's
to
right.
any listener. I am just providing
That's right.
information based on my professional knowledge. And so a trust can
That's
be
right.
funded with any asset. You should seek advice to determine which asset is best to fund a trust for the purposes for which you are creating the trust. Nonetheless, once a trust is funded, the assets of the trust are then invested for the beneficiaries and for their well-being. Now, with the charitable trust, all we're simply saying is that the beneficiary, one or more of the beneficiaries of the trust, is a charity. Okay, so the explanation that I gave around trust, it's the explanation for all trust. But for a charitable trust, the beneficiary is then a trust. So, with that, there's a second layer. There are two types of charitable trusts that we typically see. That is a charitable remainder trust. And with a charitable remainder trust, the trustee is holding the assets for a term of years, and there is a person, it could be the grantor or it could be another person who is receiving income, that is income of the interest of the what's be the corpus of the trust, what's being invested in of for the benefit of the beneficiaries. The Either again the grantor or any other person can receive that income for a term of years, 20 years, a specific set of time. After that time lapse or that time ends, then the remainder of the trust goes to the charity. So charitable lead, just use the term lead. And so the either the grantor or another person gets to take lead in receiving income. And then, oh, excuse me, I'm saying lead, I meant remainder. Uh, Meaning that the lead goes to the grantor or another person, and the remainder of the trust goes to the charity. So charity remainder trust, the remainder goes to the charity. What's left over? And so with this type of trust, just as the other one I'm going to mention, you are, or the grantor is benefiting two people or two parties, himself or another individual person, and then followed by the charity. The charitable lead trust, and I apologize if I've confused you with this language a little bit, just based on my um slip up. A charitable lead trust is the reverse, meaning that the trustee puts, the grantor puts an asset in a trust for the trustee to hold. The trustee then gives the benefit. The lead in this is the charity, meaning the charity receives the benefit first for a term of years. And after that term of years has concluded, then what's left over then goes to either the grantor or whomever the grantor has specified. Usually, with a charitable lead trust where the charity is taking the lead on receiving the benefit, the person that's named for what's left over in the trust isn't the grantor because the grantor may no longer be living. The grantor may no longer need the benefit. And so, with a charitable lead trust, the charity leads in receiving the benefit. With a charitable remainder trust, someone else leads in receiving the benefit, and the charity receives the benefit after a certain amount of time. These trusts, it is typically advisable that well over maybe around $150,000 at a bare minimum. I don't even think that is sufficient. That is some numbers that are pulled out. But I would say you need to look into the millions maybe in establishing one of these trusts because depending on how many years you're having the term for either a charitable remainder or a charitable lead trust, during this time period, you will need to pay. And when I say you, I'm referring to the grantor or the settler, need to consider the administrative costs of bearing the trust. What is it going to cost for someone else to be the trustee and manage these assets over the course of time? And what asset is being placed in the trust to make sure that the trust is producing income to not only cover administrative costs, but also create an income for greater benefit to the beneficiaries, either an individual and or a charity. Um, and so there's a lot of consideration that should go into creating any type of charitable trust, considering the asset, whether or not if the asset is illiquid, meaning that when we talk about liquidity, we talk about whether or not it can easily convert to cash. And so if an asset is illiquid, what does management look like and what work does it take for it to become liquid, such as a house would need to be sold? And so these are a lot of consideration need to go into whether or not a charitable trust will actually do the thing that you need it to do. And so individuals who are considering creating these types of trusts, I think you need to do a lot of your own research and then seek professional advice and professionals who are advising with regard to charitable trust. It's particularly financial advisors. Do the math. Do the math over the term of years to see whether or not it's worth it, because there may be other charitable vehicles available that are more cost effective and more efficient than a charitable trust. But if it works and the wealth is there to put in the trust, then this is a great vehicle for charitable giving.
So first of all, are you sure you're not a financial advisor? That was pretty good. I'm going to take an approach to sort of add to this by using a couple of examples, just to sort of to paint a picture of how these types of trust can work. And actually, it was you did a great job of boiling it down to two types. And of course, it's like saying there's two types of cold desserts. There's ice cream and there's yogurt. Each of them has 31 flavors, and so you can create there's a lot of creative things that you can do with these trusts. And lawyers have come up with some wonderful strategies. But when you're talking about a remainder trust, the goal behind this is number one, to try and take a tax deduction today for the donation of property that won't actually be received by a charity until sometime in the future. Again, she used the example of 20 years, but it can be tied to a lifespan. It can be tied to a number of different things. The second thing is figuring out what kinds of property to put in that trust. And there are two that we see the most. One is we'll see a highly concentrated stock position with low basis. So in English, that means let's say that you worked for XYZ company and you have a bunch of XYZ stock and your cost basis is $50,000. That's what you ultimately paid for it, but the stock is worth 2 million. If you were to sell it, either in part or in full, you would have to pay capital gains tax on the difference between the 50,000 you paid for it and the 2 million you sell it for. And that tax hit, particularly in Maryland, can be onerous. So One of the strategies here is that you can take those shares of stock, you can donate them to a charitable remainder trust. You can then have the stock sold in the trust. And because it is a charitable trust, that does not create a capital gains tax. So you just saved a significant amount of money. You then can put it in assets that will generate income so that you can pay to the family interest, whether it's yourself or yourself and a spouse or the next generation, that it can pay income for a period of years. And that income is based on, typically it's based on a percentage, although it can also be a set dollar figure. And again, that's for the lawyers to draft. And there's lots of acronyms that I don't think we should throw at anybody. There's lots of them. But at the end of the day, it can be a set dollar figure or a percentage. But it allows you to do two things. One, it allows you to diversify the portfolio without paying capital gains tax. Two, it allows you to make a charitable gift that is calculated to be the present value, the net present value of the remainder interest. That means if you're planning to put $2 million into trust and to take a 5% withdrawal every year, hypothetically, that means you're taking out $100,000 a year as income for yourself or your spouse or whomever for a period of years, after which the remainder goes to charity. If the remainder interest is calculated to be $600,000, let's say it's not going to be 2 million because maybe there's not enough income always to grow that. So maybe you wind up with a $600,000 gift. That's the amount that you can actually claim as a charitable gift the year you fund the trust. So you're getting a charitable deduction, you're avoiding capital gains, you're creating some income and having property in trust, which creates some protective elements against creditors and predators and others. And you've been able to satisfy some philanthropy in a really positive way. So that's one example. Another example we do see is with real estate. And you can even set up a charitable remainder trust if you're in a home, whether you own your home outright, presumably, whether you're with a spouse or you're single or widowed or what have you. If you don't have a child or children who are going to want that house, essentially you're sitting on a piece of your estate that's eventually going to go through probate, be sold, and the proceeds are going to go to the kids. You can actually set up types of trust where you can actually continue to live in the house while donating it to charity and taking a tax deduction up front, where you can still live in the house. And that is not something that's typical. So that's a solution. When it comes to lead trust, that's usually a different kind of thing. And we see that mostly with things like artwork. Let's say, for whatever reason, in your home over your sofa, you've got a Picasso. You're a very lucky human, although insuring it is expensive. But you have a Picasso over your couch. You can actually donate to a museum, for example. You could put that artwork into a trust that for the next 20 years is utilized in creating a charitable gift by allowing the museum to display your artwork. After that period of time, it reverts back to the family. So you haven't lost the painting. You've just created income or tax benefits from having it. And that's just one example. There's a lot of different examples, but we see remainder trust a lot with stock, sometimes with real estate, but a lot with stock. And we see lead trust with things like artwork or things that have a purpose that can be temporary. What else do you see, Sherry, in terms of the assets used for these things?
So I think you're absolutely correct in naming the assets. The only thing that I will say that I've encountered as a practical measure when creating charitable trust is who exactly is going to be the trustee and do they want to accept the asset. I do find that in learning and talking about these topics in theory, that there are trustees are not always willing to accept real estate. Maybe if it's still
Sure.
your primary residence, yes, but if it's a secondary residence, because it's the management of the real estate that becomes
That's right.
concerning, and then where does the real estate actually, where does it sit? Is it within the same, situs as a trust? Is
Mm.
it in another jurisdiction? So, it's very important when considering, any trust, but
Mhm.
even so a charitable trust, that you both consider, the asset and the charities that you want to give. The larger the charity, the more likely that that charity can serve as trustees. Smaller charities do not serve as trustee in a charitable
That's
remainder
true.
trust. And so if you're not looking at at the charity as trustee, you then have to find another trustee that understands all of the charitable rules. And so it can be quite complicated in
Yes.
practice. And so there are a lot of considerations, but I do think it is something worth looking into, particularly if there are multiple charities that are being named, and the also depending on the type of asset that you're going to be using to fund this type of trust.
Perfect. All right, next slide. I get to go first this time, Sherry. Now we're talking about tactics. And that should say QCD, not QDC, but we're trying to keep you on your toes. And the QCD is a qualified charitable distribution. A qualified charitable distribution is a gift made to charity directly from an IRA. This is again a relatively new phenomenon. As I think a lot of people understand, as you get older, IRAs create what's called an RMD, or a required minimum distribution. Today, that doesn't start until you're 75 years old. But qualified charitable distributions allow you to give gifts to charity annually, if you choose, directly from your IRA once you're 70 and a half years old. So that means that instead of writing a check either to a DAF or donating stock, or writing a check directly from your checkbook to charity, you can have a payment sent directly from your IRA to that charity. Now, what's the benefit of doing that? Well, if you take a distribution from your IRA for your own use, you have to pay ordinary income taxes on it first. And depending on your income tax bracket and your state of residence, that could be 30, 40%. So instead, you can give the gift directly from the IRA to the charity. There is a limit that's being indexed. I believe it's $105,000 this year, but it is being indexed gradually. And you can give that much money every year once you're 70 and a half from your IRA directly. There's no better way for people of that age to give gifts. I will say that when you have RMDs, your required distributions are forced every year by the IRS. That can create tax bracket issues. It can create bracket creep, where you wind up in a higher bracket. It can affect what's called an IRMA limit, meaning your Medicare gets more expensive. And when you do a QCD, that actually qualifies and satisfies the RMD, at least in part, depending what the amount is that year. So if the government is requiring you to take a $40,000 withdrawal and you don't need it, hypothetically, instead of taking the $40,000 withdrawal, paying maybe $16,000 in taxes and taking $24,000 for yourself, you can give the entire 40 to your favorite charity or charities. Now, you cannot fund a DAF with a QCD, but you can have the QCD paid directly to charity. We talked a little bit about gifts from stock or real estate. The least effective way to make a gift is to write a check. Now, I know every charitable organization, every planned giving officer, every annual fund officer who's watching this just went, "Oh, don't tell people that." But the fact is, it's true. And if you're going to give a gift of $2,000, $5,000, $18,000, whatever it is, if you're giving a gift and you're able to give securities instead of stock, liquid securities, a mutual fund, an exchange traded fund, a share of stock, if you can do that and you can identify the stock that's got a low basis where you would have to pay a capital gain on it, you can instead of selling it, paying the capital gain, and then writing a check, you can give the stock or fund or what have you directly to charity. They can sell it and they pay no tax on it because they're a 501c3. So that's a solution. And then one more I like to think of is you can name a charity as a beneficiary on life insurance, on HSA accounts, health savings accounts, on IRAs, on Roth IRAs, on anything. There's some property that's really great to leave to charity, and there's some property that's really great to leave to people. A Roth IRA, for example, is so valuable to leave to your child or grandchild because they receive that money and they don't have to pay taxes on it. They have 10 years typically to drain that account, but they don't pay tax on it. Whereas if you leave a traditional IRA, they're subject to those RMDs right away in an inherited IRA, and they have to pay tax on it. So traditional IRAs and HSAs, which health savings accounts, which I think are the greatest thing since the tax code has been written, unless you die with one. So if you're going to have one, if you're not married, because obviously you name your spouse first, but if you're widowed, divorced, single, whatever, and you have a health savings account, use it. or leave it to charity, because otherwise it is taxed fully in the year you die, and that's not a good outcome. If you're going to name a charity as a beneficiary, let's say you have an IRA, it's got $500,000 in it. You don't need to leave that to kids, or you don't want to leave it to your kids for whatever reason, but you don't want to disinherit them. You can, if you choose, use that IRA to take distributions annually, to buy life insurance on yourself or you and your spouse, so that when you pass away, the IRA goes directly to charity because they're the beneficiary, and your kids or grandkids get the life insurance proceeds that aren't subject to income tax. So, and there's lots of variables there and lots of additional trust planning. And the short answer is, don't try and do this by yourself. Hire a professional, hire a lawyer in your state of residence. Make sure you run this stuff by your CPA or other tax advisor. That, they're not represented here, but we're thinking of you all. And then your financial advisor can come up with various solutions. So those are just a couple of tactics, despite the fact we can't spell QCD. I'm
So
just keeping everybody on their toes.
you have summarized these tactics in an amazing fashion, and as an example, the QCD
Yeah.
from a
Yeah, it's helpful.
traditional IRA has been one of the greatest gifts, literally, pun intended,
Yes, yes.
to multiple charities, particularly to the charity that I support, Bowie State University Foundation, through my work. And looking at part of my strategy when coming on to the fundraising team was to say, okay, let's look at our donors. Let's see who they are. Let's check out, their ages, and then have conversations. Are you retired? Where are you receiving income from? And the vast majority of them were, receiving the RMD, and they were frustrated. They were happy. It's the biggest conundrum
It
because
is.
they are happy to have wealth, to be able to support their grandkids and their family members and the different things. They're happy to
Mhm.
have wealth to spread, but at the same token, a lot of the donors that I started working with were for the first time going through maybe that first tax cycle, those first 2 tax cycles, and they're like,
Mhm.
"What the heck is going on?" And so I was able to introduce this concept that everyone goes, "Can you do that? Is that
Mhm.
legal?" And I say, "Yes, if you decide."
Yeah.
For our
Yep.
donors, they're already philanthropic. They're already giving. They are writing checks. This doesn't work for you. This is not working for you. Let me show you. And literally, this is what I say. Let me
Yes.
show you how to do what you're already doing in a way that works for you and the charity. And
Yes.
so a vast majority, a good group of our donors who were already giving annually, giving in large amounts, let me not say that, giving in considerable amounts, once they went through that first cycle of
Mhm.
donating a QCD, a qualified charitable distribution, and they saw the tax benefit from doing so, it almost immediately that next year, a few of them started endowments and donating even in larger amounts
Yes.
because they are accomplishing the goal of supporting the charity of their that they desire to support,
Yes.
as well as reducing their income. And it has been a win-win. I like to call them ambassadors because they go and they spread the word to the
Yes.
other retirees. And so it's very important. The message that I want to leave here in the tactics section of this presentation is that it's very important that every individual is working with an advisor who can review all of the assets that they have. One of
Yep.
the items when people come to my law office and they begin to estate plan, it becomes clear to me that they don't always share the totality of their assets with their financial advisor because they forgot. They thought it to be insignificant that they just inherited land in another state. They just didn't
Yeah.
think it mattered. And then I say, "Oh no, this matters." So you need to go back to your financial advisor and tell them what you told me because there is strategy in maintaining wealth and transferring wealth. And I believe that if more individuals really understood the wealth that they have. A lot of people aren't philanthropic because they say, "Oh, I don't have it to give. I have to support myself and my family." But if more people had professionals in which they were fully transparent and could receive just comprehensive advising, they would find that they actually have more wealth than they believe that they have, and enough to
Mhm.
share just a portion. And so you don't have to starve your family
Right.
for the sake of the charity or forego being philanthropic for the sake of your family. There is a way to do both things with the proper strategy and tactic.
Yeah, QCDs are a great way to amplify your giving. Because just a simple example, if you're giving $3,000 a year to your alma mater, but you're taking a $5,000 distribution from your IRA to do it, paying 2,000 in taxes and then giving 3,000 as a gift, you can give the whole 5,000, still have satisfied what you were doing. It cost you nothing and the charity won. And now you're a larger donor and you feel better about it and you're the ambassador, as you mentioned. I love that. All right, it is your turn. We are cranking through some tactics. Now let's talk about the plan, because you,
Mhm.
you do need to have a plan. And so this is yours. You go first.
Yeah, so when you're building a plan, for me, it's only one plan. There aren't multiple plans. Like people like to say charitable plan and estate plan. You're one person. There's one plan. So I think you have to first consider who you have and what you have. And so the what you
Mm.
have, we already talked about. We talked about the assets and the property and the things that you own. The who you have, a lot of people tend to only consider their family and to their immediate family, which is fine. But the who you have can also be the causes that you support. So I ask people, particularly in my questionnaire, I ask direct questions about giving in my estate planning questionnaire because I want to know, are there causes that you give to? And giving doesn't always mean financially. I think people who give more of their time are the
Mhm.
best givers because time is irreplaceable. Time is the thing that you can't get back. And so I find that people who give their time, I then ask, okay, well, when you're no longer able to give your time, how do you think you will support this organization? Do you want to support this
Mhm.
organization? And so those are the questions that I would encourage everyone to think about when you're clarifying causes and goals, and understanding that those goals can change over time. I used to have three very small children. Now I have one young adult and two and one soon to be young adult. And so my planning and my goals are different. And so I really want people to understand when you're building a plan, it's a constant building. It never really gets built. It's fluid. It's ever changing, just like your life is fluid and ever changing. And so be gracious and just kind of set reminders, just like you pay your taxes every year. You know it's coming. Holiday season, you know it's coming. Set up a point in time in a year where you are not only building but reviewing some of the things that you've written down. And those things are primarily who you have, literally write them on a piece of paper, who, people and charities, could be business interests, what you have, and that is, again, assets, and I also want to consider personal property, sentimental personal property, as well as personal property like the Picasso that may be hanging over the living room sofa. Write those things down, particularly for estate planning. When I see a family conflict, it's not over the $5 million IRA. It's over grandma's wedding ring. And so be
Yes.
very cautious write
Yes.
down what it is that you have, and don't spare anything. So just take time. I journal, and I like to encourage my clients to do the same thing. And then once you're clear on what you have and who you have, that really dictates what type of vehicle you use to reach your goals. That dictates whether or not you're going to use a charitable trust or you're going to use the services of a DAF. Because, again, in being strategic, It doesn't, we've already mentioned, it doesn't make sense to use certain assets in a charitable trust, and it may not be
Right.
beneficial to use certain assets in a DAF, but you don't know which vehicle to use until you know which assets you want to use for a specific purpose. And the last thing that I'll say is when you are planning, and this concept initiates with estate planning, but it also goes into charitable planning. And that is, think beyond yourself in your lifetime. You are here. These are your desires from the life that you've built, from the experience that you have. There is a need to create a successor. That successor could be in the form of a trustee to take over in the event of incapacitation or death, or that successor could be the person who is making decisions about your charitable giving for your DAF. When you have a DAF, the funds and a DAF is with a DAF sponsor. They need someone to give them guidance as to what charities to give, particularly if you have a mission based DAF that doesn't list specific charities but lists specific causes. How are they supposed to know who to make a distribution to? And so, leaving someone
Mhm.
and cultivating and teaching someone to understand your why and allowing them to be empowered to make decisions on your behalf when you're no longer able to is a major part of planning that a lot of people miss. A lot of people who come to my law office for assistance who are adamant that they want a trust end up not getting a trust. And in the end, they don't get a trust because when we think about a successor trustee on a revocable trust where the person creating the trust is the initial trustee, but there has to be someone next, they are at a loss for who can serve in that capacity. The one thing that I will also mention with charitable trust is that the creator cannot be a trustee. You have to name either a third party, or I mentioned the charity being a trustee. Who are you going to name as trustee? I find that the average everyday person, um, does not really have a successor trustee identified, and it becomes a very difficult place of planning. Now, there is the option of utilizing the services of an institutional trustee, but when using the services of an institutional trustee, we are looking at a minimum of $2.5 million. There are issues with real estate, particularly as I mentioned, personal residences being used to fund the trust. And so when you are planning these things, you have to think about who, this goes back to the who you have, who can serve in your stead, make decisions for the assets that you are leaving in the way that you would have them make them. And so there's a lot of consideration that must go into this. And as you can see and hear, a lot of advising.
Well, you did a great job with this. I'm not going to add a lot, except that I am going to say I think we may have a solution for you for institutional trustee management with smaller numbers. Because you're right, most big companies only want to deal with huge accounts, but there are some independent trustees that can work with smaller amounts. It is not as intimate or personal as having a family member who's capable of doing that, but like you said, a lot of us don't have family members who are necessarily capable, willing, or able to serve in that capacity. So I'm going to grab the last slide, which is to break some of this building down into a shorter term, and then I want to make sure we have some time for Q&A. So Hannah is in the background. Please put your questions in the chat box, and she'll be glad to facilitate that momentarily. So let's talk about the next 90 days, what we can do right now. And, the word that I like to use is inventory. When you talk about building the plan, you were talking about the plan involving the people and the who, but also the what, the assets. I think it's really important to have that inventory, but before you start building anything around charitable planning, you got to figure out your why.
Mm.
What is the mission of giving money away? Are you purely doing it for tax reasons? Most people don't. That is not a driver. People don't let the tax tail wag the charitable dog. It just doesn't happen. What most people do is they come up with a charity or a mission or something important to them, and then they seek advice to find the best ways to support them. That's where you start with an inventory. Your financial advisor should have this. You should already have a meaningful balance sheet. If you don't have that, naturally either ask your advisor for one or start working with one who can help with that. But knowing where everything is, how everything is titled, what the purpose is, what the time frame is, how they're useful, how they're going to be taxed, not just to you, but potentially to heirs, allows you to do that. And then, Shari gave us 6 weeks to update the documents. Sometimes it takes a little longer than 6 weeks, depending how complicated, but she's very efficient, so that's good. If you can, you're going to reduce to writing in one way or another. You're going to reduce to writing what your wishes are, matching your why with your who and your what. And it can't be simpler. In my mind, it can't be simpler than that. Who are the people? Who are the organizations? Who are the charities? Why do you want to support not only those organizations, but those people, and in what way? And then, you can start talking about some of the whens and some of the hows, but ultimately, that's what you get advice for. The how is advice. There, we could name 10 different kinds of trusts, and it wouldn't resonate right now. But if there were a situation where you were looking for a solution, yeah, I liken it to when you hire somebody to drill holes in a wall. People don't want drills; they want holes. This is one of those situations where you don't have to know what tool to use. You just have to know what the outcome is you're looking for. And then you find people who understand the tools so that they can reach in and grab the right one. So I think it starts with why, it starts with a mission. Then you do inventory. You figure out what is not only the what and the assets, but the who and who are the parties. And then you reduce it to writing because all of this requires some effort, some legal planning, and some documentation so that it gets handled properly. Because a cocktail napkin might be okay in some cases, but it's not an ideal situation, at least in my mind. So, what did I miss on the 90 days? And then we'll get to some Q&A.
No, I think you covered it all.
Beautiful. Well, then let's do this. On your screen, you will find two wildly attractive photos and a QR code for each of us and our contact information. If you'd like to schedule a call with me, if you'd like to schedule a call with Shari, we are delighted to have a conversation with you about your estate plan, your financial plan, your legal documents, your philanthropy, any of those things, and we'll be happy to help. Hannah, what's in the Q&A box? What do you have for us? We've got about 7 minutes left.
Sure. So I've got a question about donor advised funds. Can you
Mhm.
allocate pay or a certain amount of money monthly to contribute to a donor advised fund?
You can. You can make you can make an automated gift of basically any amount. I think you can make gifts as small as $25 to a donor advised fund. I don't know whether payroll companies love that, but it can be a sweep from your checking account very easily. Payroll companies might allow it if the employer and the plan does, but if not, you can set this up for yourself at basically no cost or challenge.
Oh, great.
Something tells me, when you're talking payroll, you're talking, um, after taxes, correct? Because 'Cause I'm pretty sure you can't do a contribution pre-tax. So
No, no, it would not be pre-tax. You
okay,
you you could
okay.
send no, you could send money to the account, but it wouldn't be pre-tax. You'd have to claim that at the point in time where you did your tax returns. No, it's not a
Yes.
pre-tax. So that's why I think it's better to just have the check come into your checking account and then have that created draft to your DAF every month.
Okay, so I just wanted to
Yeah,
clarify
no,
that
good,
because
great point. That'll come. There's no question that's coming, but for right now, yes, that's not a thing that I'm aware of.
All right, we've got another question here. Are there specific questions or oh, sorry. Are there specific questions we should be asking charities before setting up donations?
Absolutely. Especially if you're doing, first of all, you might want to find out what their greatest needs are and how you can play a role, but you also need to make sure that you don't just donate a piece of property that they can't handle. Because some particularly smaller organizations don't have full planned giving departments. They don't have charitable gift annuities or other vehicles in place. They don't have the ability to manage a real estate portfolio or handle those things. So before you donate a gift, now if you're writing them a check, generally they'll take it. But if you're doing any kind of planning that involves legal documentation, or it involves a life insurance policy, or it involves other types of property ownership, I think it's real important to ask them what they can handle and make sure that there's a gift acceptance policy, and they do have one. Sherry, you have anything to add to that? I'm sure that's right up your alley.
Yeah, and at a very basic fundamental level, ask them to whom you actually write the check. To whom should the check be payable? I don't think a lot of people realize that trade names or brand names for charity aren't necessarily the legal names that should be put in the documentation. And so, as a fundamental, I see it all of the time with wills, where people are great and secretly philanthropic and include these charities in their last will and testament, and it's not the legal name of the charity. And so now the personal representative does have to go to court to say, "This is what I believe the person intended. They just had the wrong legal name." And so one of the basic questions is, I want to give, to whom should I should I give? What is the name? Second to that would be, what can you accept? Before you even get to the asset question, and before you contact a charity, if we're not it's certain mission-based charities, it's clear, Maryland Food Bank. It's clear you're giving money to support hunger, right? But there are other charities that you want to make sure that you're clear on why you want to support that charity. Because again, your why may not be what the priorities of the charity is. And so you want to make sure that you have conversation. There may not be specific questions, but I find that a lot of people like to give to charity in secret. And that ends up creating complication around the donation. I think that it's really worth having being clear on what you want to do as a donor and having some conversation about feasibility, as Eric already mentioned.
Yeah, there's also the difference between unrestricted and restricted giving. Unrestricted giving is just essentially a check that goes to highest and best use, whatever the charity wants to do with it. Restricted might be for a specific need. So, for example, if it's a university, you could do a restricted gift that only goes to the endowment, or that only goes to scholarships, or that only goes to accounting majors, or whatever you want to do. There's ways, and that would be in a gift acceptance policy and in a gift acceptance letter as well. Especially if you want to endow a fund or do something that's named, that's perpetual, there are limits and there are ways to do that. So I think communicating the larger and the more complicated the gift gets, the more communication you should have with the charity to make sure that they can accept it and that you're doing it right, because mistakes can be time consuming or expensive. Maybe one more.
That's all we have.
That's all. We have
We
no
had
more.
one more about minimum contribution for donor advised funds, but you answered that in my first.
Yeah, no, some of them, it depends on the sponsor of the fund, but some of them are $25. I mean, some of them are really, really small, and so you can begin that philanthropic journey with $5 a month if that's something you wanna do. It exists. I don't know how practical that is, but if it's something that you wanna do for family, or for your 8-year-old, and you wanna set up something and have your 8-year-old talk about what to do with it as it grows, I mean, that's certainly an option, but the minimums are very small for DAFs. That's one of the reasons why they're so popular. So, I think we're wrapping up. Oh, what do you got? You got a last
Yeah,
comment?
I just wanted to add, for the institutions that allow the lower minimums, always pay attention to, because a lot of the transaction is digital. You'll do it online, but as a donor, you should really pay attention to the donor advised fund agreement that you're signing, and making sure that you will always have control as a donor while you're living. But again, making sure that you're agreeing to having someone else take over, and also specifying the causes and the charities. I think when a lot of people get excited with the donor advised funds, where you can start with lower amounts, and miss that the donor advised fund will only distribute according to the agreement that you have. So don't forsake the excitement. Don't forsake the agreement because of the excitement to be able to donate. Make sure that the writing that you agree to, because it's very easy to click I agree when you're doing this online. So make sure that you're reading through those things and that it actually meets the specifications that you desire as a philanthropist.
Great advice. You always get the last word. The mic drop, you always get that. I'm not gonna steal it from you. Thank you for doing this with us today. It's always fun to work with you and always nice to make a difference. Shari, you're terrific, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for watching and for listening. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, contact information's on screen. And we hope you have a great day. Take care.
Have a great day.